If all is well, you are looking at a lovely fish with a shark fin. And the title of my remarks today is Expecting More, School Librarians and Change. And I want to talk a little bit about, because Tracy had mentioned the book. Expect More is an interesting book because it's very much written for folks you interact with parents, with teachers, with principals, and it's a free download. And so I'm hoping that it's a tool that you can use to work with folks when you get the question of what exactly do school libraries do and what do we need libraries for and all of that wonderful stuff. The atlas, which is much thicker, I realize, is written specifically for librarians, and we're working on another version which is a little bit more streamlined and easier to get a hold of, and we're calling it The Radical's Guide to New Librarianship. So you'll be hearing more about that throughout the year. So expect more was a theme that came out of lots of different conversations I was having with libraries. And what was interesting is all of this wonderful data that talks about how much our communities love libraries of all sorts, public libraries and academic libraries and school libraries. And, if you do wonderful, let's survey them and think of what they think about libraries, you'll get like 5 people off into the corner going they're obsolete and horrible, and then you get the rest of them going, I love libraries so much. And then you ask them, do you ever go to a library? And they're like, not so much. And so we have this sort of love to death. The other situation that we run into is OCLC many years ago did a study and they asked one question and they said, what is the one word that you associate with libraries? And that one word will shock absolutely no one, which is books. Now, on its surface you go, oh, they think we're just books, or maybe we should be just books and that's what they're wanting, and etc. But as a social science researcher, you quickly realize that when people use terms and when you phrase questions where you restrict potential answers, they tend to mean a lot, even though they're using the same word. And think about your own life. When you think of books, do you think of recreation? Do you think of learning? Do you think of knowledge? Do you think of potential money sources, or more often than not, potential money losses as we go buy more and more books? So that's you have this idea that people love libraries even though they don't necessarily use them that much. You have this idea that they might have an older idea of it. And then a lot of librarians would come to me and they say, Dave, we buy it, we're great, we want to do cool library stuff like you're going to talk about today. But when we go out and we ask our communities, what do they want? Their answer is more or less what you're doing, a lot more of the same. This happens with teachers, this happens with principals, this happens with students. And just to clarify as we move ahead, I'm going to use the word communities a lot. And the reason I use communities is not to say public. I use communities because that's what we have in our schools. Communities of students, communities of teachers, communities of the whole school coming together, communities in our districts and in our cities where we live. And the academy, a university, is a community of scholars and students and administrators and food service and all sorts of folks. So when I use that word community, I want you to think about my school or my district or my schools and my districts, and as the case is in many of your lives. And so what happens? Why should we go in and we have these discussions, and why do libraries need to change anyway? When we ask them, all they say is, you're fine. Steve Jobs had a great phrase. He said, it's not the consumer's job to know what they want. And while when we talk about libraries, I hate the word consumers, in this case it was pretty apt, because let's face it, Apple looks at us as people that want to spend a lot of money on iPhones and such. But he had a point, which is we're the library professionals. We're the people in charge of running, maintaining, and advancing the library. It's our job to think about what's next. And so study and focus group and survey and all of this would show that when you just ask someone, how can my school library be better? How can the school library program better serve you? You get really, really bad and unhelpful answers. Maybe you get someone who's educated and you get brilliant, but by and large, not a lot. And it's not their fault because their life is not all about us. Why should they stop and think about how could the library be better? All they're worried about is making their life work. And if they've figured out that they can get this from the library and this from Google and this from their teacher and this, then they're fine. Right? If there's any inadequacies in our program, their job, they're not thinking, oh, I'm going to go in and fix the library to fix the inadequacies. They're thinking, where can I plug this hole? And so they move out and they look in other different places. So a lot of this expecting more theme is not just that we as librarians need to expect more of ourselves, and as we'll talk about, more of our communities, but that the communities, our students, our teachers, our principals, our boards, etc., need to expect a lot more out of us. Because when you bring them in and you say, did you know that we could do this, or we do this, or we have done this, they suddenly go, oh, I never thought about that, but that's really cool. I mean, I've had college students who said, boy, our library sucks. I had to go to Google to get any online journals. And of course, what they're doing is they're searching Google that's pushing them back to the library subscription where they're getting the journals, and they don't know that. But making them aware of it, and then making aware that that's an investment and they can do more out of it and they can learn, all of that's about expecting more. So that's the general theme that I want to work on. And in that, I'm going to argue that even if you're brilliant and you're doing the perfect job for your community, tomorrow you may not be, because life changes. The world that we exist in, the place that we exist in, the groups that we're serving, education in the domain we work in is radically and rapidly changing. Frankly, as it should. As the world's conditions change, so too do the services and how we educate and how we learn. So what I want to start with is the idea here that learning is change. Think about it for a moment. When we take in, toddlers, just about 5th and 5 and 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds, and they start school, and maybe it's preschool, and we march them through this curriculum at all levels of structure. We march them through a curriculum, and what we seek to do in marching them through this curriculum is we are seeking to change how they see the world. We are seeking that they understand the world in a deeper way, in a wider, more expansive way, in a more malleable way. That is, that they have the ability to change the world. So pardon me for a moment as I use a U.S. model. But when the idea of the public education emerged in the early 1900s here in America, the idea was that the workplace was no longer seen as preparing people to, in essence, govern themselves, that we needed to educate them all, not just people who were rich enough to have free time or white enough or own land enough or male enough. And so this movement around everyone needs to learn, everyone needs to be engaged, that movement here in the States around public education was coupled directly with a push for public libraries. That schools were going to have a curriculum and were going to have teachers, and they were going to work through a very industrial model, but they were going to work to educate the masses, and libraries were there for people who couldn't afford to go to school, were too old to go to school, or needed to investigate things that schools could not. And that ethos of learning at the center of libraries, of all libraries, have led to school libraries and academic libraries. It's led to how we think about public libraries all over the world. And that idea, that momentum that libraries at their center are about learning, while that's natural to talk about school libraries, is becoming more and more natural to talk about with public libraries. Now, certainly internationally there are people who are coming to grips with that thought, let me put it that way. But this idea that we collect, we build services, we organize, we take school money, tax dollars, what have you, is for the betterment of our community. It's about learning. And so everything we do is about learning, and to be about learning is to be about change. And we know that. We've seen students, sometimes we've been the students, sometimes we've been parents of the students, sometimes we've been children of the parents. We've been there where change is hard, where people resist, where they really pull back and say, no, wait, I'm not learning too much, I'm seeing too much, this is getting too complicated. But we've also seen that reverse, that moment that we treasure, that moment that we've turned into mythology, that moment that keeps us going, where someone learns something and they look out at the world and they suddenly say, oh, wow. And their whole worldview changes. It all shifts for a moment. They begin to understand the world in a much more complex way, or they begin to understand the power that they've gained through things like reading, or math, or science, or what have you, or art. They begin to say, look, I not only can memorize this and learn it, I can manipulate it, I can change it, I can gain control, because that's ultimately what we're doing. The children and students that we educate today in our primary and secondary schools are the people who run the country and the county and the world and the school tomorrow. And if we don't open their minds, if we don't make them expansive in their thinking, then we're in trouble. More so, what we have learned is that we're never going to be done with our job. That when they're done with primary school, it's important that they go on and continue to learn in secondary school and high schools and then universities. And even in universities, we don't believe that we're done, that it's vital and important that once they're gone and they get that degree, they continue to learn. That what we've seen through critical thinking in the States with a big push around things like Common Core and such is that it is not enough to pump them full of facts and data. We must challenge their understanding and grasp. We must build their interpretive skills. We must turn them into critical thinkers, and we must turn them into lifelong learners. And what I'm here to tell you throughout this whole thing, if I don't get back to it, let me make it really clear. The school library is potentially, and I would say should be, the most fundamental, powerful, important tool to lifelong learning. I know we focus on reading and literacy and story time, and I know we focus on information literacy, and we'll get to that. But ultimately, what we allow them to do is to open up the doors and say, what do you want to learn today? And if it's battleships or rattlesnakes or art or the 17th century or how to be a whatever, that's what you can do in a library, and that's what you should do when you graduate and when you retire and what have you. We can build inquiry-driven students of life that when they graduate and leave our halls, this school library can look and say, we were fundamental in creating citizens who continue to learn and have an enriched and expansive view of the world. That we can break through local restrictions and truly create citizens that can improve society. But let me be very clear. Even though I say school libraries are learning, not everything in a school is educational. In other words, it's really easy to go, of course we're about education. We're in the school. What else is in the school? Coke products in the vending machine. And you go, Dave, that's a vending machine. Fine. Some schools don't have the vending machine. And the reason they don't put that in there is that they've determined that even the vending machine and what we feed folks for lunch and how they eat is all about nutrition, and nutrition is about health, and health is about being learned and informed and active in your own management of your own health. So you have books in your library. Those books don't by their very nature become educational. It's not like people walk in this radiation of understanding suddenly entrance their mind. When I guess they get angry, they turn into Learning Man or something. But the idea here is that just because you're in a school, and just because you have all the accoutrements of education, well, look, I've got books here, and look, I have a whiteboard over here, and look, whatever it is, that's irrelevant. Just because you're there doesn't make you educational. It takes a mission to do that. And the mission that I argue you have as a library professional, and we're going to talk about that phrase too, the mission of librarians is to improve society through facilitating knowledge creation in their communities. Now I want to walk you through that for a moment, because the first thing I want you to notice is that this mission is your mission. The mission of the individual. It's a mission that as a library professional you should be carrying out, whether you're in your school library or whether you're walking home at night. If you leave it and take a job in business and industry, you have this mission in common with people, librarians at Oxford University, and you have them at Chase Bank. These should be the parliamentary librarians sitting there in Ottawa should have this as their mission, as do the public librarians in Vancouver. It's what ties us together. Because the mission of our institutions, the mission of our buildings, the missions of our organization, they may vary widely, from informing legislatures to helping the public to teaching kindergarten children to working with doctors and lawyers and what have you. And those missions of the institutions are important, but still resident in all librarians is this mission. And the mission is to improve society. Feel free to just end it there, because it's a two-part mission. The first part is our ethical statement. This is what we do. We do this in an active way. And how do we do it? Through facilitating knowledge creation in our communities. And those two actually balance each other, because there are going to be questions that you get that you don't want to answer because it doesn't help improve society. I'll give you a quick example. If a child comes up to you and asks for information that you know is going to be used to bad purposes, from building a bomb to accessing pornography to whatever your community determines is detrimental, then that first part of that mission kicks in. Now, we have, and many of you have been trained to think of the notion of librarians as objective and unbiased, which is impossible. You can't be. If you believe that public education or private education or formal education of any matter is a societal good or is an obligation or is good to begin with, you have a point of view. Because once again, go back to the 1700s. If you were poor and you could work in a mill, that's where you were improving society. So by taking them out of the mill and putting them in a school, you've made a statement. And you go, oh, sure, at that level. Yeah. How do you feel about Wikipedia? I love Wikipedia, by the way. But does it help? I was at a public library and they said, if a student, and we know they're a student, I guess their height, comes to our reference desk and asks us to print out a Wikipedia page, we won't do it. Now, I was doing this in a sort of circle of workshop of librarians, and they all went, looked very, very offended. And so when we dug a little bit deeper, they said, we would love to print out the Wikipedia stuff. We know it has value. It's, there's lots of different values to it. But we know that if these students print out Wikipedia and they use it within their schoolwork, the school that we're serving that's right next door has a policy that says they're going to fail. So by making easy access to printing this, we're helping them fail in school. That's a problem. What are your policies? How do you fit them in, and how does it fit learning? So this is the mission of librarians, which is not about being unbiased or neutral or a wallflower or disappearing, but being an active, crucial part of your community, pushing it forward through academic achievement, pushing it forward through diversity and inclusion, pushing it forward in expansive beyond a curriculum, pushing it forward in the knowledge of the parents, whatever it takes. This is our mission. And it may vary from our institutional mission, but it's our mission. Now, we know that this mission can make a difference. We know from study after study, and this is just a list of a few of them, that school library programs make a difference in students' learning. We have amazing data. In fact, we're one of the few areas of librarianship and frankly of education that has direct data and studies at a large scale that shows that by having an active school library media program, students do better in all of their courses and classes. All right? So I want to be really clear. It's an active school library media program. It is not. I'm going to say this 12 more times and you're going to think it's a glitch. It is not. I don't know if that was 12. It is not the room. It is not the presence of a library. It is not the presence of a book. It is not the presence of a fox, and you do not get it in a box. Whatever you want to talk about it, it's not the fact that there's a library there. It's the fact that it's an active school library program that has an active school librarian as part of it. A library, any library, is a mediated space that is owned by the community and stewarded by the librarians. That it is not simply a place that's absent. That it takes time and management and stewardship and curation, and that active curation is what makes difference in school performance. I'll give you an example. Here are two school libraries. Both of them demonstrate beautifully that they are mediated environments. So take the one in the upper left for a moment. That's the one that has, you can see sports drama and historical fiction. Clearly, someone has taken the time to go out and highlight different materials, make them available, show them to students, etc. But now take a look at the one in the lower right-hand corner. This is also a highly mediated environment, and I don't mean just because the books on the shelves are in order. If you take a look at these two different pictures, what you are seeing is two different active interventions into the life of students. And notice, there's not a person there. But the people that were there decided things like, stacks good. right? So we had a situation at Syracuse University. We had a very progressive looking library, and we decided that our stacks were full. We were going to build an offsite facility. We're going to move all these stacks so that we could have more study space, more communal space, more place for freshmen to come and study away from their dormitories and classes. This was our wonderful thing, and there was a certain set of faculty who stood up and said, no, that's not what a library is for. Put in more bookshelves, put in more stacks, put in more stuff. And there was an interesting and not necessarily, at least initially, friendly conversation about what is the role of a library. Well, what is the role of a library? What is the value? What is the decision that has been made by the people mediating that upper left-hand space, that the materials are essential and important and primary? But imagine if the entire library, and I know we're sort of clipping the picture, imagine if the entire library looked like that. Where do the students sit down? Where can they work as a group? Where do they take these materials and turn them into videos and turn them into reports and turn them into lots of different things? Now take a look at that lower right-hand picture. What's primary here? Even though we don't see the students, we can imagine there are beanbag chairs there, for goodness sake. Everything's low, so we know this is probably an elementary school, but there's all about come and study and work. When Corinne Hill, the interim director at Dallas Public Library, now the current director of the Chattanooga Public Library, was redoing her library branches, I asked her what's her guiding philosophy, and she said, we put the people space in the middle where they collaborate and they work, and we put the books around the outside of the room like art. Some people got very offended. They said, oh my goodness, you're just saying it's decorative. And she goes, that's not, one, the role of art. For centuries and centuries, art has been there to inspire, to challenge, to educate, right? If you go into a church and they have stained glass windows, they're not just random patterns, they're telling parables and stories. And if you've ever gone to the Vatican in Italy and you go to St. Peter's Basilica, that whole big building there is telling a story, and it is very telling of a message to a medieval pilgrim that this is as close to heaven as you get, so you better pay attention. Right? So what do these spaces tell us? What is the interaction that they see? What is the value that they feel the library professional is going to produce? Is the library professional creating a stage that people are going to go rifle through? Or is the library professional creating a space for interaction, for conversation, which we'll get back to in a moment? And I now want to take on that phrase I keep using, library professional. I am tired of this, and let us all take a moment to stop it. This is the idea that, oh, you're only a library aide. Oh, you're only a library clerk. Oh, you didn't get your master's in. And you would think that as a professor and someone who's in a Master's of Library Science program, I would share this snobbery. I mean, I'm trying to figure out a nicer word to it. I believe that you can become a librarian in 3 different ways: by your education, which I think there's great value in library science programs and that master program, and we work really hard to make sure that that is an immensely powerful experience. But we know that there are plenty of librarians out there in schools around Canada and around the world that are there by title. You were a teacher or an aide or someone who walked in the door and they said, you're the librarian. And there's the librarian by spirit, of which I hope we all are. And that's people who seek to serve and seek to take on that mission of improving society through knowledge creation. Right? So even if you have it by education, that doesn't mean that you're using your education properly. And even if you only got it by a title, that doesn't mean you're being restricted to your humble beginnings. Once again, I'm using this, I hope the sarcasm's coming through. I can't see the chat window, but if you're throwing things at me, I'll get it in a minute. We all need to understand that whatever our background is, if we are in the school library, we are the person responsible for setting that stage and mediating that environment. We are the ones who are going to facilitate knowledge creation. We are the ones who are not there to take the kids when they're done in the real classes. We are not there to put people in a study hall. We are not there for the test taking. We're not there in case the principal needs a pretty place or an architect needs to show off. We are there as librarians to improve our students' lives, to teach, and to be fundamental in the improvement and learning of our students. To be fundamental in the improvement and teaching of our teachers and our faculty. To be fundamental in the understanding and policy setting of our administrators. We are active in that, not simply caretakers. We're stewards. We take care, but not simply by being passive. Now, I used to give this speech, I still do give this speech to incoming library students, and we set up this anonymous online discussion board where they could ask questions if they didn't feel comfortable doing it sort of out in the open. And I gave this grand speech about being innovators and being there to change the world, and we'll get there. And the student said, anonymously online, "I am a great worker bee. If you give me a task, I will do it brilliantly. If you tell me what you need to know, I will do it beyond your expectation. But don't expect me to be an innovator. Don't expect me. I didn't get into this field and I don't have the personality that I can reinvent the world. I am simply a worker bee." I'm here to tell you that there's two problems with that statement. One, we don't have room in this profession for worker bees. Let me be absolutely, brutally, frighteningly honest, because I'm on the front lines trying to fight for school librarians every day, and I need a bunch of school librarians behind me because we're a profession that not everyone understands and values. And I'll tell you, if you stand up and you say, "We're the worker bees of America," you will not get in the next school budget. You will not get the next advance in what you're doing. You will not get the 3D printer to help you build your makerspaces. You will not build the hydroponics laboratory because it integrates science into the classroom and into the library. If you say, "I am the worker bee," people will say, "Gee, our budgets are getting really tight and we can only afford to keep teachers," regardless of whether school librarians are in fact teachers. By the way, interesting note, in Chicago, they are desperate for more school librarians, not because they fired them all, but because they didn't have enough teachers. They turned around and said, "School librarians, turns out you're certified teachers. You're going to be now teaching math and science and English." That's actually not bad. I would love it if they said, "We need you more in our libraries and we'll get you back there." But at least there was recognition that there's education and potential. The other problem I have with worker bees is a misunderstanding of the word innovation. Right? When you think of innovation, when we use that word like magic fairy dust around the world, we tend to have pictures of gentlemen like this. This is Steve, right? Steve Jobs, and he gave us the iPhone and whatever. And if you're not into Steve Jobs, you're not an Apple fiend, then we can go classical, right? Innovators are people like Newton, who decided that he could figure out calculus in a weekend and gravity and all this other stuff. Or you can go with the classic and slightly overused innovator model of Edison sitting in his lab, coming up with the light bulb and phonograph and whatever else he could do. So this is what many people, when you say innovation, think of. They think of, "Oh, I can't be Edison. I'm sitting out here in the prairie. I'm sitting out here and I have to drive through 5 school districts, and you expect me to take the time to sit there and invent a whole new internet and a whole new way of understanding the world and come up with the next iPad?" What I'm asking you to do is to rethink innovation. And I'm going to do that by telling you who my favorite innovator is. This guy. This is Danny Biasoni. Danny used to own something called the Syracuse Nationals here in Syracuse, New York. It was one of the first professional basketball teams back before the NBA, which is another story. It turns out if you follow the lineage, they're currently the 76ers. But they started as the Syracuse Nationals here in Syracuse. And Danny had a problem. This was 50s. Danny had this basketball team, and he wasn't getting a huge amount of turnout. He wasn't getting enough money because not enough people were coming to watch basketball. And there was a reason. Basketball was god-awful boring. Now, you have to understand that if you live in Syracuse, New York, in the Orange Nation, where Jim Boeheim and his kids go to school with my kids, you cannot say basketball is boring without explaining yourself. So let me explain myself. This is, in the early days, what happened is basketball was a defensive game. That is, as soon as you made a basket, as soon as you went up in the points, your job was to hold on to the ball. And you could hold on to the ball as long as you want. You would dribble it, you would dribble slowly, you would keep trap and keep people from getting the ball, and you would get the scores of these games would be like 15 to 20. A low scoring, long game, all about holding a ball away from other people. And Danny was going nuts. He was trying to figure out, how can I speed this up? And he said, I really want scores to be like 80 points. I want 80 points scored because I see when they get the basket, that's when people really get cheering. And he looked around and thinking about ways to do it, and he found this basketball coach in the college levels who began implementing something called, ready for it, a shot clock. If you don't know what a shot clock in basketball is, if you look over Danny's shoulder, you see that 24 up there. What that shot clock says, as soon as your team gets the ball, you have 24 seconds to shoot the ball or lose the ball. If you hold it for 25 seconds, the other team gets the ball. If you hit the backboard, we'll reset the clock. But the point being that you have 24 seconds. Instantly the game changed. The game went from suddenly holding the ball to shooting the ball. Suddenly you got much more aggressive on offense. You began introducing things like the slam dunk. You began introducing the alley-oop. You began introducing much more aggressive positions. It led to a lot more offense and speed, and it became a visually more interesting game, and his attendance went up. And this was at the time when national television was getting bigger and bigger, and they were looking for something to cover, and they looked and said, we've got baseball. We've got baseball, and we've got football, and football's pretty cool because people like hurt themselves, but we need another sport to put on. What could be exciting? What could we watch? Look at this basketball. It's brand new. It's revitalized. It's fast. It's shooting. It's got tall guys. It's got characters. It's got slam dunks. It's got athletic achievement. Let's do that. And so it built itself into a television empire that these days are in the billions of dollars. Now, is that a nice linear line? Did Danny lead to billions? No, but he made a significant contribution. And he didn't do it by sitting there and going, how can I turn basketball into a billion-dollar sports empire? He did something really simple. He said, I want him to score more balls. I want him to score more points. And so when you sit and I say librarians need to be innovators, what I'm not saying is you need to reinvent the universe. What I'm saying is start simply. Start by, instead of putting Dewey numbers everywhere and then a poster hidden somewhere, by the way, the Dewey number equals this, change them to English. Allow students to come in and they sort the books. We'll talk about that in a second. But I want you to think of, when I use the word innovative, I mean you. And I don't mean Steve Jobs. I mean you today. And if you can innovate by saving someone 3 seconds, if you can innovate by helping the teacher out 2%, start there. All right? But you're not a worker bee. We don't have room for worker bees. What we need is a learning-based library program, not a stuff collection-based library program. And to do that, we have to understand that learning is about conversation, that conversations are about participation, and participation is about co-ownership. So let me break those down for you a minute. What do I mean by learning is about conversations? Because aren't we not supposed to talk in the class? Well, stick with me. So in the 1960s, 70s, there was a fellow by the name of Gordon Pask. Here's a picture. Isn't that the greatest picture ever? I mean, I long for the day when I can wear a bow tie and have that kind of scowl going. Unfortunately, the hair is not going to happen. But anyway, Gordon Pask's job, he was trying to figure out how to get computers to think. And he said, until I can figure out the computer thing, I guess I'll look at how people think. And what he did is he went in and he looked at how people learn and learning theory. And he came up with this idea called conversation theory. That is, when people seek to learn, they converse. Now, they may talk with their friends, they may talk with their teachers, they may talk with experts. Most of the time, they're talking to themselves. Now, that might have been a little wacky, but if in your head you just said, what is he talking about? Who were you talking to? So what Gordon Pask said is we have these conversations. When you're reading a book, very often you'll have two voices. You'll set yourself up with two voices in your head. Well, if that's true, then that's true. Well, that can't be true. And only after you sort of think it through, talking with yourself, do you end up with, okay, that's what I'm going to believe, that's what I'm going to hold. Now you can say, oh, Dave, this was the 60s and 70s. Please, they didn't even have PET scans. How can we believe that? But if you look at all the other pedagogy that you've probably been seen read in the field, or your teachers have, they will run across terms like metacognition, John Dewey, way back in the turn of the century, previous century, critical thinking, reflective reading. All of this is about a conversational mode of learning. That in order to learn, we must converse. Sometimes we need a quiet environment so we can talk to ourselves. Oftentimes we need a noisy, raucous environment where we can talk to friends and teachers and colleagues and people who aren't like us so we can generate and build new ideas. So learning is about conversation. And if we're going to be in the learning business, if our libraries, our school library programs that we mediate, that we make happen are about learning, therefore they're about conversation, what is our role? Does that mean that we should just have empty rooms with lots of sound absorbing and bring people in and say, what do you want to talk about today? It's not that easy. Our role in those conversations, and frankly the role of teachers, is that of facilitator. We've moved from the idea of instead of the sage on the stage, the guide on the side, and all these wonderful things. What we're supposed to do by good pedagogy is understand that we don't teach. You can't teach someone anything. People learn. What that means is you can send them the right direction and give them all the information you want, but if they choose to ignore it, if they choose not to listen, then you can't force them to. You can trick them, you can create lots of environments that they'll want to, but ultimately it's their choice. So our role in this learning is as facilitator. We've already talked about one means of facilitation, which is how we set up our physical structures. If you look at your library program, is it set up to allow quiet conversations? Good. Does it also allow loud conversations? Does it allow people to work together? Does it allow conversations across disciplines, across age groups to the teacher, bringing people in from the community? Do you host authors? Do you host experts? Do you bring scientists in? How interesting of a place is your library to talk to people, not simply to browse and read? So as a facilitator, how do we facilitate? Well, the first is we provide access. You go, oh, yep, got it, no problem. Shelves, books, done. Except we're talking about access to conversations, not just stuff, right? So the idea is, once again, do we bring in experts? I had a public library. They were doing a Geek Girls program where what they wanted to do was encourage girls to get more into STEM education. They brought down a fighter pilot from the Air Force National Reserve who was a mother and a fighter pilot, and she brought helmets and they could do the mic back and forth, and she talked about what it was to be a woman, what it was to be a fighter pilot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That conversation was probably, for some of those students, more powerful than reading, I could be a fighter pilot. Fighter pilot, reading from a book that has a lot of white males being a fighter pilot. And stop trying to catalog the internet. One of the things that librarians say, I don't know why teachers don't come in. I give them all this good information and they don't come in. Well, what do? Well, I give them, here's your lesson plan and it's on Egypt, and here's 500 things that you could include in your classroom. Have you ever talked to them? Do you realize that they have slides from 1952 and you're asking them to change them? Maybe they need something besides a URL. Maybe they need a serious intervention. I have school librarians who have such good relationships with their teachers that the teachers come to them and they hand them lesson plans and go, this is not good enough. This is not good enough for your library. Seriously, I know that sounds weird, but that's what happens because the librarian has worked hand in hand with them, can not only understand how to include interactivity and conversation, but understands assessment and can demonstrate improved assessment on given factors afterwards. So it's not about the stuff. It's access to relevant stuff and materials and people and opportunities and environments. We provide knowledge and training. Our core is information literacy, and that's not know the Dewey Decimal System and know the difference between a journal and a magazine. That's truly understanding that, there's a conversation going on, and some conversations have peer review, and some conversations have certain forms of evidence that are required, and some conversations are just people talking out loud. And some conversations, when we do them in public, invite bullying. And what do we do about bullying? That's information literacy. We provide an environment for this to happen. We provide a safe place to explore dangerous ideas. Think about that for a moment. A library is a safe place to explore dangerous ideas. Does your filtering policy acknowledge that? Do your selections acknowledge that? Have you worked with your administration to figure out why is it that we filter out all this stuff about negative examples of the internet when they're in their most supported, curriculum-driven, expert-supported environment, and then we send them home where on their phone they can access it all without us and not even know what they're getting? Have we had the Facebook conversation? Have we had the Twitter conversation? Have we had the your life does not end at 18 and you get to start over conversation with them? It's a place to engage not to escape. Now, I put this out, and a lot of people don't like this comment because they say, if I'm a bullied teen or I'm a bullied child, I went to the school library to escape. When I was the outsider, the school library was a haven for me, and I don't want to disregard that power. But in order for them to come to you, you had to mediate a space where they felt safe. I had a librarian tell me a story about a young child who was being abused and came in and said, I'm being abused. And they didn't want to talk about it. They didn't feel they could take action. But what that librarian did, besides finding social services and knowing about it, is they started saying, do you like music? Can I teach you how to play music? Hey, what about this? And they began giving them something to do that showed them that they could do something that built up their self-esteem as the social services kicked in and worked. When you have a student who comes in and feels that they're failing in class because they don't fit in, you should help them find something that they love to fit in while you have a conversation with the teacher about the failing part. It's a safe place to engage dangerous ideas, and it's about engagement, not escape. And motivation. It's a place where we can build on intrinsic motivation, where people can learn what they love and follow that. They can understand and not feel like if it doesn't fit on a test, I don't get to know it. They can come here and know it and try it and see what happens. All these kinds of things. Working with public libraries hand in hand, so after school they can continue that inquiry back and forth. Working with college libraries so that as they graduate they feel like they're ready to move into an academic environment. And working with extrinsic motivation so that we understand that when they come into our saying, I must find 5 citations on ancient Africa, we can find out, all right, why those 5? How can I make those 5? How can I turn this useful? How can I take this and feed back to that teacher what's happening when they come in with that? Maybe we could punch it up a bit. Now, the other part about learning as a conversation is that conversations are co-owned. This is Sue Kowalski. She won the ASL School Library Media Program of the Year a few years ago. And she's done some amazing stuff. And one of the amazing things she did was something called the I-Teams program. She has an I-Team. Students come into her middle school, so this is grades 5, 6, 7, 8. They come in and they volunteer. And now, it's not about they come in and they shelve books for her, or they sit a checkout clerk. They come in, they set up the technology for her. They actually do things like book support. When it's time for acquisitions, she puts out the catalogs and say, what do you guys want? And they actually go in and do the ordering and buying. Right? They shelve, but not because he puts it in the right order, but because they know where it fits better than she does. She doesn't do any shelving. She's too busy working with teachers on curriculum and teaching. She now has a point where she has teachers coming to her to get an I-Team student for the year. They're like graduate assistants in college. They work on their new literacy problem. They build a web page for them. They build a set of citations. They integrate a blog. They do whatever it is, and they help the teacher teach their class through the library. They make collaborative buying decisions. They do all of these things because over the years she's built up a trust with the students and with the teachers. The students feel like they have ownership, that they have importance, and they're working with them, and she's proven that importance and value to the teachers who help build it, and becomes a virtuous circle. Now, this is the picture of her winning the award. This is the picture of her library this year. And you're going, huh? So this year they're renovating her middle school. So they've taken the students and they've dispersed them through the district. Some have gone into increase the elementary school. Some of the 8th graders have gone to high school. They've moved them around. And so what she did is she went to her principal and said, my kids are too important not to have this I-Team experience, this bonding experience. They were all together. Buy me a used Winnebago. Buy me a used recreational vehicle. And there it is. And this is not a bookmobile. Yes, it's got books and materials that can go in and out and she can share and loan them. But you'll notice on top of the red book cart, there's a bullhorn. Because what happens is when she pulls into a parking lot, she lets the students know they're there and they can come and work on projects and learn and understand what she's doing and work with technology and computing right out in the parking lot. The library is wherever the students are, not what the building is. She's made that happen in a real way. Look, bottom line, librarians, once again, by education, by title, but certainly by spirit, are radical positive change agents. Our job is to model the change we want to see in our students and our teachers. How can we expect students that exceed our expectations, students who take great pride in learning new things, who do beyond what is expected of them? How can we expect to generate those students and inspire those students if we ourselves don't model it? How can a conservative, risk-averse, quiet, receding, don't bother me library program produce leaders that change the world? How can we expect that if we ourselves are not radical, positive change agents? And you sit there going, oh, great, Dave. How am I going to make a lesson plan that's going to change the world? Well, let me give you an example of one library. It's a public library, but you'll see the tie in a second that changed the world. These are images from Ferguson, Missouri. So the United States, clearly we are one big melting pot that have fixed all our race issues, except we haven't. So a white cop killed a black teenager, left their body on the ground for hours, unarmed. This led to race riots. This led to bringing out the cops. Not only did the cops come out, but we in the United States have extra military equipment lying around, and guess what we do with it? We sell it to our local police forces. These cops showed up with mine-resistant armored vehicles. They showed up with Kevlar body armor. They showed up with semi-assault machine assault rifles. They showed up in black camo. I mean, let me be really clear. The state troopers showed up in camouflage gear in Ferguson, Missouri. If they wanted to be camouflaged for their environment, they should have been wearing Walmart smocks, but instead they're wearing camo gear. And let me not be clear. At the same time, there was rioting, there was looting. They tore down, rioters tore down businesses. They burned cars. This was a bad situation. Adults would sit there with their families in their houses, and the adult would sit with a baseball bat beside them on a couch in case there was trouble that came to their door. And the kids were wide awake. They were wide awake because there were bullets flying, there was tear gas exploding, and they weren't in school. Because when this riot broke out, it was supposed to be the first week of classes. Now, this is very interesting. The schools closed based on this. Originally the mayor and then the governor closed the schools in order to curfew. So the kids were alone at home and in the midst of these rioting with no place to go, no refuge to go to. Not only that, but Ferguson, Missouri has a huge underserved, underprivileged population, and so a lot of those kids were getting lunches through school lunch programs. They would get fed by going to school. Schools weren't open. These kids were alone, up all night in the middle of conflict, and they were hungry. And then something amazing happened. This is a sign that was put out at front of the Ferguson Public Library. Stay strong, Ferguson. We are family. The Ferguson Public Library and the St. Louis County Public Library that served that school district stayed open. Not only did they stay open, they then worked with the teachers to organize school in the library. They brought teachers in with worksheets, and when they ran out of room, guess what they did? They worked with local churches, they worked with museums, and they had these kids in classrooms that, because the schools were closed, all around the city. Not only that, but they had year-long relationships with food pantries and food service programs, and so these food pantries came in and they fed the kids. And by the way, this didn't happen just because they made a phone call. This happened because that's where the food pantries did it during the rest of the year anyway. They just agreed to keep going. Now, you can't tell me that the librarian in this library, in these libraries, couldn't have called up and said, we'd like to close. We've closed the schools, we've called out the National Guard, but the library has to stay open. You really think that's the response they would have gotten? But librarians change the world. They make the world a better place. They took hold of this dialogue of black versus white, of militarized police force, of Ferguson being an inferno, of Ferguson being a place of destruction, and they said, we are a family. And we're going to educate ourselves, and we are going to improve our community through education. To the point that they changed the dialogue. Not only they were just at ALA Midwinter presenting, but they were on our national news. They were presented all across the country saying, look, there's something that is very constructive happening in Ferguson. Librarians chose to change the narrative. They chose to face great adversity, great odds against them, and they chose to make a difference, and they chose to make a difference through education and learning. The fundamental, most important and essential value that sits at the middle of all our libraries is learning. And it doesn't happen by having a room, and it doesn't happen by having a books. Librarians are radical, positive change agents. Your buildings aren't, your books aren't, your shelves aren't, your databases aren't. You are. How you arrange them, how you provide them, how you push them, how you educate them, how you teach them, how you make them available, how you work hand in hand with teacher and student to find the reality and find what's important. That is what makes you a radical positive change agent, and that is how we change the world. If you don't want to produce worker bees, then don't be a worker bee. If you want to produce the exceptional, be exceptional. What we need in Canada and what we need in the States and what we need in Italy and what we need in Africa and what we have great examples of and we need more of are people who change the world. Change doesn't stop with our students. We are not consumers. We are not the people who pick which books and put them on the shelves. We're not clerks. I don't even care if that's your title. If you're taking the time to watch this, you care more about your job than simply the paycheck. You care about making a difference. And the reward you will have is not going to be great riches. I'm sorry. But it can be great riches in experience, in building a network of change agents, in knowing that you are setting the future right, in preparing the most precious gift as a society we have, our future. And it sounds corny and it sounds over the top, but if we don't do it, who does? We are not at the mercy of publishers and test prep. We are not victims. We are school librarians who will stand up and fight for our libraries and fight for our students and fight for our communities because we are advocates out to change. And I don't care if you're serving one library and I don't care if you're serving 50 libraries. I know that can be stressful, but you can make the difference every day in one person's life. That adds up. Making a connection that a student didn't see adds up. Because that connection turns to another connection, turns to another connection, and soon what we have is an energized body of the society that is growing from the bottom up. And as it takes the reins of society, in business, in government, in schools, in education, in culture, they have learned to continue to learn. And they have learned to be radical, positive change agents, and the model they have for that is you.